As the title explains, when we were given this opportunity to come and speak to you, we decided that what we want to try and do is just demystify things a little bit. Transglobal Express has been in the freight forwarding business for over 20 years and has a lot of experience. And we're well aware of some of the complexities and some of the tricky hurdles that you need to get through in order to be able to both import and export. However, at the end of the day, with the right people around you and the right access to information and expertise, we don't think it has to be too difficult at all. And we're well aware that many of you are from small and medium-sized businesses, and for you this is probably the first time you've considered exporting. And far from trying to put you off, we want to show you that actually it can be a very, very straightforward and easy thing to do. So what's all the fuss about? Well, obviously, it's hard to imagine a more exciting time for international trade than the present, particularly given the high profile that the government is actually giving to the current initiative. The opportunities for exporting and importing are growing at a very, very impressive rate. And with these opportunities, some challenges do also exist. There are many factors which contribute to the growth of international trade. Obviously, you've got the World Trade Organization doing a lot of work, implementation of trade agreements, increasingly regional trade bodies or regional collaboration of countries to provide free trade areas, and in particular the continued economic integration of the European community, and also the growth of emerging markets such as India, China, Turkey, and many, many more. It is an exciting time that we actually live in. In the past, opportunities for many small businesses ended at the borders of their own country, typically because of limited resources, the high cost, the high degree of expertise that you needed to be able to infiltrate a foreign market. But these days, because of the internet and because of the advanced technologies for allowing the movement of information, it's a much, much easier prospect. And it's not only kids in their bedrooms selling stuff on eBay, but literally anybody and everybody can run a business either remotely or by collaboration with local distributors. Export drivers, just want to touch on this very briefly. We're seeing a massive growth in the demand for British products, which is quite ironic when you think that in the 70s, we probably had some of the worst reputations for manufactured items, and having become very good at services as a result, all of a sudden we're starting to see advances in technology and better production processes that actually brand Britain is a very, very strong brand. And in the emerging markets, India, China, there's massive, massive demand for well-known British brands. But of course, it's not just the big companies that are able to take advantage of this. There are a lot of, each big industry typically has a supply chain and has a group of small industries that can benefit from working around the edges. For example, take Jaguar Land Rover doing tremendously successfully. But off the back of that, there are a hell of a lot of parts suppliers, accessories, people who provide support services are also doing extremely well. And the world's becoming a much, much smaller place, so much so that when products can't be sourced to the satisfaction of customers in their own local markets, they're more than happy to look further afield. When we want cheap technology, we look to China. But when China is looking for milk products, it looks to the UK, it looks to Denmark, it looks to countries which have got a good reputation for producing quality dairy products. And that, of course, following the tainting of Chinese milk products back in 2012. But even things like children's goods and products, believe it or not, in countries as far afield as Australia, where you get countries with a relatively small population, quite often trademarked items and things with registered brands are extremely difficult to actually obtain in countries with small populations, simply because the cost of the license to be able to go into production can be prohibitive. And as a result, there's a very, very strong market for example, Pixar, Disney, the big names in children's clothing, bedding, and all those other products. And Of course, there is the economic necessity as well. The recent recession that we've been through has highlighted that we can no longer expect to have an economy that is based simply on mortgages, on the financial sector. We do need to get back into developing a manufacturing base. And exports are absolutely critical for us to have a stable economy going forward. As British businesses finally start to see the earliest signs of recovery, the government's very keen to spearhead an export drive as a key part of their longer-term economic strategy. Targeting a doubling of export revenues by 2020, the government is also increasing its sponsorship of low-interest loans for foreign buyers. It's always done this through trade missions in various countries, but it's very, very keen now to point to the world how easy it is and how safe it is to buy British products. Under the banner "Business is Great," the UK Trade and Investment Group is actually hoping to get as many as 100,000 more British companies exporting by 2020. And George Osborne's career depends on it. So what about barriers? Well, I have to give some credit here to some of the couriers that we actually deal with here. In this case, UPS did a survey of small and medium-sized businesses, both in America and over here in the UK, quite recently, and they just in targeting these customers, they identified that the primary reasons that people or the primary problems that people saw to exporting were obviously the economy and their nervousness about it, but also their fear of customs and other government regulations and bureaucracy. There were other things too, but interestingly, the same people identified that actually the top strategies for overcoming these barriers were in fact to talk to others who had previous experience exporting and to make sure that they provided their staff with the right kind of tools so that they have full information about what's going on, so they can be as prepared as possible to make sure that they overcome these barriers. And obviously language plays a part, particularly once you get outside of the English-speaking world. But again, increasingly, again and again and again, over 50% of the strategies involved making sure that you spoke to the right people and you had the right kind of support on board. However, despite the growth in business confidence generally, many small businesses have indicated that they're still unlikely to be exporting anytime soon. In some cases, businesses recognise that their products and services are for local consumption only, and there is no practical way of exporting. In other cases, business owners are simply being cautious, and judging by yesterday's attendance, it's pretty obvious that we've still got some cautious small businesses around this country. That said, the number of small companies indicating clearly that they will be exporting for the first time, and in particular within the next 6 months, has grown significantly. And if you actually look at the chart to the right there, you can see why. Having already established your product base, your service base, having already established your key processes and systems, the incremental cost of rolling out your product to other markets is relatively small, and as a result, almost half the people who had indicated that they were planning to export could see clearly that they were going to get a return on their investment in anything from 6 months to a maximum of a year, and almost everybody was absolutely clear that they would more than offset the cost of their first venture into exporting. There is enormous potential. The international market is vast. If you only tap into a tiny percentage or even fraction of a percentage, you can make a lot of money. There is rapid economic growth going on in a number of countries that we would never have thought were strong candidates for exporting, even as little as 5 or 10 years ago. However, the markets, countries such as China, India, Turkey, Brazil, they're all growing at a phenomenal rate. Brazil in particular, traditionally a very difficult country to infiltrate, is now actually a very strong market because of the 2014 World Cup and also the Olympics coming up in 2016. They're investing heavily in infrastructure, which is creating opportunities in just about every area. Very promising markets. Include agricultural processing, consumer products, computers, IT services in particular. And India, again, a very, very exploding market with an extremely young average population of less than 25. And as a result, massive demand for sort of modern products and in particular strong brands. And as I mentioned earlier, a number of these countries, because they've grown so quickly, actually have very limited access to local sourcing, but at the same time they do have increased personal wealth across their population. Low-hanging fruit. Well, as the name suggests, it doesn't have to be difficult though. Whilst some of these markets have traditionally been difficult to get into, what tends to happen is that most businesses will automatically go and target the countries which are easiest to access. So countries that with open trade policies or established trade agreements, countries that share a common language, or if not a common language, then the same attitudes to business and to protecting copyright and trademarks and basic legal principles. Also, these countries typically have very well-established routes to market, in their own market, which makes actually establishing sales outlets very, very simple compared to some of the new growth countries. And of course, the internet. We cannot underestimate just how powerful the internet has been in making it possible for you to set up a sales distribution in virtually any country, because where once upon a time you would absolutely have to get on an airplane and keep shuttling backwards and forwards in order to be able to get a business off the ground, nowadays you don't. Nowadays you can do the whole thing with a laptop. So where do UK exports go to? Well, unsurprisingly, given what I've said, the thickness of the blue bands gives you an idea of the countries which have got very strong established markets, typically Europe, typically America, and whilst there has been some drop-off from about the time we joined the EC to many of the Commonwealth countries, we're seeing a resurgence, and actually some of the biggest growth is now coming about in countries such as Canada, Australia, and it isn't just Europe, and it isn't just China. And it isn't just Russia. So Europe also, though, despite our differences from some of our European countries, is a massive growth area because of the relative simplicity of being able to access those markets. I won't try and complicate things by trying to explain this, but all of us have got a supply chain. The components of that supply chain vary and differ. I'm not here to sell you on consultancy services, but what I do want to get across to you is that we believe that logistics play a very, very important part in the modern supply chain. And I'm not just talking here about you getting your finished product to the end user. It's the smallest quantities they can get away with without actually disrupting their sales processes. And so logistics plays a very, very important role in both in your suppliers getting their components, both in moving stuff around the country, getting it to distribution points, getting it from the distribution points into the retail outlets. It is, to quote a colleague of mine, the blood where the supply chain of your business is the body. If any part of logistics breaks down, your supply chain breaks down. When you're looking to export, it's actually very important to be aware that the shipment itself will need some physical preparation in order to ensure that it's suitably packed for transit, and meets with any carrier-specific requirements. At Transglobal, we don't just deal with businesses. We have a very high number of people who use our services, private individuals who use our services. And you'd be surprised how little attention people give to packaging their treasured possessions and their treasured gifts they're sending out to relatives in the Far East. We've got a washing machine sitting in a polythene bag in our warehouse, and the customer's surprised that it got damaged. Making sure your shipment is sufficiently packaged and contained is an absolutely key part of the exporting process, and something you cannot skimp on. Your shipment can only arrive successfully if the packaging you use is good enough to support the size, weight, and the texture of the product that you're actually supplying. Labelling is also key, although these days labelling is taken care of for you, typically by someone such as ourselves or the carriers direct. But also ensuring against damage and loss. Most people overlook this. It's quite important to consider what it would take to replace these items, because with the best will in the world, we use couriers, airlines, shipping companies. Most transport organisations will have limitations on their liability, and you can find yourself being very surprised. And some of the time, the liability, some of that liability might cover you for loss, but it might not cover you for damage. As previously mentioned, it's really important to make sure you've got the correct documentation. Now, depending on what it is you're actually exporting, this documentation could be something as simple as a small commercial invoice, the airway bill, and that's pretty much it. Most people will that work with Transglobal produce their own airway bill, or produce their own commercial invoice, or use the commercial invoice that's produced as part of our booking process. We provide them with the airway bill, so more often than not, all they've got to do is label it up, and the courier that they've selected will come and collect it and take it away. However, depending on what it is you're exporting, there may be other things to consider, such as certificate of origin, or inspection certificates, or import or export licenses. There are lots of very tight controls on certain types of product. Daft as it may seem, even toy guns are dealt with the same skepticism as real guns. So some processes are more difficult than others. However, most of the time, a very simple commercial invoice and the airway bill are enough to get your goods to where they're going to. Bear in mind, however, that more often than not, your goods will have to go through customs. And this is where this other documentation can be vitally important. For instance, it can make the certificate of origin can quite often make the difference of whether you get charged duty or not. So the important rule here is give all the information you can. Don't be frightened about the fact that you've only got it on paper. The driver will take whatever you've got, but give as much information as you can. Just to give you an idea of how wrong it can go, there's a very famous story about a US company who a few years ago tried to actually export some cookies to Japan. And the customer was really keen to start a distribution business across Japan. Went to great efforts to make sure he did absolutely everything right, got all the right paperwork, got all the right packaging, checked out every single thing. However, upon arrival in Tokyo, 25% of the stock was immediately impounded. And despite the fact that there was no evidence of such on the actual labelling of any of the products, it was discovered that a dye used in one of the types of cookies was actually banned in Japan. And that meant that basically he was going to lose 25% of his shipment and have to reship without this dye contained in the product. More worrying, though, was that this new distributor that the guy was lining up was potentially going to be very disappointed and walk away, and thus he would have lost his opportunity completely. What this actually teaches us, though, is that things will go wrong. In the end, they were able to actually trace the source of the red dye. They were able to get the supplier to replace the goods, and they were able to recover the situation. They were able to get the customer to realise that they'd ordered enough stock to last for more than enough time to get the replacements across to him. And thanks to the freight forwarder that the customer was using, he was given some very sound advice. Where customs were looking to have this stock returned to the US at great expense to the customer or to the shipper, the freight forwarder suggested, in fact, that it was donated to the US military base on Okinawa, which, while still part of Japan, is actually governed by US laws rather than Japanese laws. And so everybody ended up happy. And so the key thing is mistakes will get made, no matter, things will go wrong. And service recovery is absolutely critical, and that means you've got to have the right people on the ground. Now, when it comes to shipping, different companies, will look to different solutions. Bigger companies will typically have a large shipping department. They'll have internal resources. In particular, they'll have specialists who understand the markets they deliver to, who understand the types of products that they're trying to ship, and will become experts in that one particular area. Smaller businesses might consider dealing directly with carriers such as DHL, UPS, TNT, etc., or an air freight organisation. Many small and medium-sized businesses are probably as well to consider a freight forwarder, simply because it means they do not have to have the internal resources, and they're tapping into a wealth of experience covering many markets, many types of products, many different variations in terms of weights, dimensions, and restrictions that that could affect the efficiency with which you can ship to a particular market. However, I've put up there just a bit of a challenge here, in terms of hybrid solution. What we're seeing increasingly is that more and more people, they want the control, they want the advantages of being able to do things for themselves, even though they can't necessarily resource it. And so they're using technology, using the internet. They're typically looking for a way in which they can keep control of the bits that they know they can do best, and hand over only the bits that they need a third party to handle for them. And each has their pros and cons. Choosing an internal resource, means that you've got hands-on control of the overall shipping process. It means that when there is a problem, you've got resources that you can immediately deploy to try and solve that problem. And of course, over time, you're going to develop a massive amount of expertise in your own product area, if indeed you are dealing with one type of product or shipping to one particular type of market. The downside, of course, is that to set up a shipping department with that wealth of experience is very expensive. The carriers do a very good job of providing a lot of these tools for you. If you're large enough, larger customers, particularly those with the simplest requirements, may find that actually dealing with a single carrier suits them. Particularly organisationally, a lot of companies like to deal with just one carrier, simply because then they've got more chance of getting their way in terms of what time the carrier comes to collect the goods. And often you've got processes which mean that you need to have them call at 4 o'clock every day or whatever it may be. So dealing with one carrier can give you a certain degree of control that way, but it doesn't necessarily give your customer the choices that they want. However, the carriers do a good job of providing shipping tools which will actually help you with a lot of those processes. However, the downside is that the carrier that you choose or contract to deal with isn't always going to have the best price for the job. They may have restrictions that other carriers don't have with regard to the weight of the item or the size of the items, depending on local transportation logistics at either end of the actual delivery process. They also may not have access to all markets. The US carriers, for example, will be prohibited from delivering to countries such as Cuba, where non-US carriers would have no problem doing that. So you need to consider these things and recognise that dealing with one carrier alone may not always work for you. A freight forwarder is usually a good option for anyone who can, with anything more than the simplest of needs, big or small, as they can normally give you the widest access to the widest range of options, allowing customers to find the right solution for each shipment, rather than just a generic for your product, for your markets, etc. Freight forwarders give you the option of being able to find the right solution for each and every shipment. And obviously they can do this by giving you access to a choice of carriers and a range of, and the larger ones, in addition, will provide a range of value-add products and services, which will make the whole process a damn sight easier. Most freight forwarders are actually free to work with any or all carriers, and the largest will have invariably negotiated rates which allow them to pass on savings to smaller businesses that smaller businesses might not otherwise get by either dealing direct with a carrier or dealing with dealing with air freight or shipping companies. So and many of the freight forwarders will actually try and differentiate their service by providing their own customer care teams, who are often better at liaising with the carriers to escalate and resolve issues that can arise, not least because as a very large customer with those carriers, they'll quite often have preferential access to key account managers. However, freight forwarders are not all equal. Smaller companies may not have the same skills base or resources that some of the larger freight forwarders will have, and that can actually cause delays in communication rather than actually facilitate communication. They may also not be entirely independent and may not always therefore be able to pass on the kind of savings that you were hoping to get, simply because they don't have the buying power that some of the larger freight forwarders would have. At Transglobal Express, we're actually one of the largest in the UK. We recognise that customers require access to the best prices available, so that's our number one focus. But obviously without compromising service and without compromising quality or flexibility. We started life as a freight forwarder over 20 years ago, but increasingly we're seeing that more and more customers want this hybrid solution where they can take as much control as possible over the choice of carrier, of finding the right price, of finding the right carrier for the type of product they've got. And so our focus very much today is on providing the best possible parcel delivery and freight services, but also solutions, tools that will allow you to select the right solution for each and every shipment. And that can involve either using door-to-door courier services for parcels, documents, packs and envelopes, or using air freight or sea freight, palletized or non-palletized. And we provide various sets of tools and information services to help you find the right one of those solutions. Transglobal is actually well known for, first of all, price, but secondly, choice. But also, we provide exemplary customer care. Most of our customers can save anything up to 70% off booking an ad hoc product, directly. And part of that comes from having the choice. We have preferred customer status with all of the couriers, so that guarantees that on the rare occasion that something does go wrong, we can very quickly get the right people working to unblock the situation. Obviously, over the years, we've developed quite a wide base of expertise and experience. And whilst we can't do anything directly for you to assist with getting your stuff cleared through customs, that's always the customer's responsibility. What we do have is a wealth of experience to assist you in making sure that things do not get caught up in customs, and when things do happen, that things are moved along as quickly as possible. We have a lot of experience in terms of weight and dimensions handling, and will guide you to whichever carrier will best suit your product based on if there are issues with size or weight. And we have a range of information tools that basically allow you to track the whole process of your booking from the minute you place it right the way through to delivery, which includes in some cases being able to access issue statuses. So if something goes wrong within the internal processes of some carriers, we can actually draw your attention to that because we've got live access to most of the courier systems. I just want to go through a number of our customers who, and I'm going to go through these very, very quickly, specifically to draw to your attention the kind of challenges that they came to us with, because I've invariably found in business that most people, when you talk to them, they're absolutely convinced that they've got a unique product, they've got unique issues, they've got unique problems to try and solve, and actually, if you're dealing with somebody such as Transglobal who has a range of solutions, it's very rare that the problems can't be overcome. In one case, for instance, this customer required global coverage, and therefore couldn't be restricted because of geography or operational issues, or and occasionally because of political issues. They have oversized and overweight shipments. They're also very dense and therefore very, very tricky to X-ray. So we've assisted them with all of these issues in order that they can get a free flow of parts for the British auto industry around the world. And in some cases, where it makes sense for both parties, we also can assist them with bespoke collections. This was quite an interesting story. When I discovered what this customer was doing, I was really pleasantly surprised. This customer actually learned how to create the best kind of popcorn from whilst in the States, and has decided to come back to the UK and create gourmet popcorn flavours for connoisseurs. Obviously, trying to tap into the market of wealthy individuals who've got a bit of spare cash, who like a bit of a challenge. They needed scalability though, because because in addition to having in addition to being a wholesaler for retail outlets in some countries, they also need to be able to provide to retail and corporate events, and at the same time to be able to sell online to individual customers. So that flexibility on being able to access palletized solutions with air freight, sea freight, but also with door-to-door to individual customers was absolutely key to them. And also gift wrapping and fulfillment services. Whitney Woods has been a long time customer of ours, and is in the market of creating creative and interactive marketing products, which it sells all around the world. They came to us one day with a very specific problem, which was that they were increasingly finding that, having come up with these imaginative ideas, they were struggling to remain competitive. Having broken into the US market or the Chinese market, they were finding that eventually local competition would essentially copy what they were doing and would be able to outbid them all the time, because of course they didn't have the cost of air freighting the goods across to their client. So we sat down and worked with them to come up with a hybrid solution, which basically allowed them to. We assisted them with load planning and documentation, and a plan for local transportation at both ends, and basically persuaded them to switch to sea freight, which gives them an 80% saving overall, whilst at the same time still being able to access air freight for topping up, and of course courier services for when they need to send across specific samples and individual items. So the access to those three very, very different channels has proved invaluable, and has meant that they kept their key accounts in the States and are continuing to prosper. Many larger retailers will use a single shipper of choice, as I mentioned before, simply because they don't want one courier turning up at 2 o'clock, another one at 3 o'clock, another one at 4 o'clock. So it suits their operation quite often to standardise on one particular courier. And of course that will get them the best rates from that courier. However, that doesn't always suit the end customer, particularly if the customer is overseas. And so this company, Skypax, has tapped into that opportunity and has created a global parcel forwarding solution, which allows customers to be able to buy online from the likes of Marks & Spencer's or Next or whoever. Skypax provides them with a UK address that they can have their goods delivered to free of charge, or at whatever best rate the retailer is able to offer. And then Skypax then gives them the best possible rate to forward those goods onwards to their country of choice. And they do this by plugging into their own website a system which allows them to get an instant quote for a variety of shipment options. They're using a product which Transglobal has developed, which essentially gives them real-time access to the best possible price for getting the goods of choice, whatever it may be, to anywhere in the world, and it's all done seamlessly without the customer actually being aware of the fact that it's Transglobal providing this service. And we do that because we've developed, having already established our integration to the 5 key courier systems, we've now extended that out to provide a single solution for individual customers and to be able to use for themselves. And the scope of that interaction is that you can build into your websites not only quotation but also full booking capability and also full tracking capability. Interesting story. The very, very large Welsh slate company in North Wales was involved in a major contract in the States whereby they shipped via sea freight container loads of freight for a major building project. However, towards the end of the project, they realized that they hadn't got enough. And it may sound daft, but they approached us looking for a solution to get 120 tons of slate to the US within 7 days. And palletized to a ton per pallet. We were able to facilitate that. It wasn't cheap, but compared to the overall cost of the project overrunning and what they would have incurred in terms of penalties on the contract, they were massively satisfied with the fact we were able to find them a solution. We also provide international fulfillment for a number of companies where looking for goods for expats, they'll literally build up stock using our warehouse facilities, and then when it makes sense when they've built up enough stock to send a pallet out to whatever country it might be, we'll then actually send those out. So is a freight forwarder the way ahead? Well, yeah, small and medium businesses can access better resources and discounts by dealing with a freight forwarder, particularly larger ones. They can get access to tools and information which help them with the whole process. There is definitely greater flexibility there, and a number of freight forwarders, such as Transglobal, will provide a range of value-add services which will benefit you no end. However, a freight forwarder is not for everybody. If you've got prohibited items which the couriers can't handle, then you will need specialist services. Temperature-sensitive items are something which we don't deal with, and bespoke routes, whilst it's something we can assist you with, is probably dealt with by dealing with a specialist courier who's able to facilitate that. For example, if you require goods to be dropped off at various locations in a particular sequence. I thought I'd throw a few headlines in for you. Over the years, we've seen it, we've done it, we've seen it all. Telephone rings, prize rocking horse quarantined. Believe it or not, in Australia and a lot of other countries, non-heat treated wood has to be subject to quarantine regulations because of the critters that might be in the wood. And therefore, this is the kind of story you might actually get a phone call about. Antique compass cause of nuclear alert. Well, they didn't send out men in white suits, but it did actually set off a radiation alarm because of the luminous paint on the dial for the compass. Racing pigeon in need of directions. Believe it or not, we had a distraught customer on the phone, desperate for us to return his racing pigeon, who seemed to have lost his way home. So, because of the extreme cold, disorientated. So we popped it on a motorcycle courier, sent it home to North Wales. Okay, so hopefully you've seen here that there are plenty of people out there who can assist you with the whole process of export. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask me, I'm free to take them now, or you can come and see us on our stand 497, and we're happy to talk to you about your requirements.